believed what I'd seen, I still somehow couldn't accept it. I needed to better understand why it had happened and why such atrocities were still happening. I grew increasingly disturbed by the narratives coming to us through the mainstream media and circulating in political and humanitarian circles. What was in the making in the Congo was an African Renaissance, the dawn of a new era of peace and security. These stories and interpretations were diametrically opposed to what I'd seen myself. That the West continued to dole out money to Kagame and Kabila fueled my outrage. How had it become accepted wisdom that Kagame had the right to invade Zaire and go after armed Hutus there? As the weeks wore on, I kept working but could not sleep. My husband insisted it was physically impossible to not sleep for so long. Surely I was sleeping and not realizing it. I tried melatonin and sleeping pills. They did not work. If I kept my eyes open, I would stare at the shadows on the wall or a sliver of light from the street. If I closed my eyes, I'd see lifeless faces and bodies. I'd hear the hiss of jungle, the voices in a camp. Sometimes I imagined hands around my neck or covering my mouth, and I could not breathe. Clothes ripped and bodies shoved. I continued to keep these thoughts to myself because they shamed me, and I assumed my husband would not understand. I did more research. Beyond drinking red wine into the night, it was the only thing I could think of doing. I wanted to understand, first of all, why the international community had failed to protect the refugees in October 1996, when the RPF had invaded Zaire. Bait and kill. The phrase in itself is chilling, and the reality worse. When Rwanda had invaded Zaire, I discovered the RPF used humanitarian organizations, the United Nations, and journalists as a means to locate and kill refugees. As the war progressed, there was mounting evidence that Rwanda had gained access to satellite equipment that enabled it to intercept the texts as well as voice and video communication of NGOs, media, and other personnel in the field. As soon as aid workers found refugees and got them to stay in one place so they could bring them food and medical care, Rwanda-backed rebels and RPF forces would move in, cordon off the area and attack, or chase the refugees into more remote, denser areas of the jungle in what they called bait-and-kill operations. Nick Gowing, a British journalist who conducted a study of information management and media coverage in eastern Zaire, quoted Kagame himself, saying that humanitarian information exchanged by aid workers was militarily valuable. NGO information is not just humanitarian information, Kagame said. It is also military information. One NGO worker told Gowing that as soon as they sent their situation reports to the agency's headquarters, we were challenged by army commanders on the ground about the contents of the messages. We were strongly advised by UN security that all calls by satellite phones were being recorded. A Western diplomat told a physician with Doctors Without Borders that the organization's radio traffic in the towns of Tingi-Tingi, Kisangani, Goma, and Bukavu was being monitored by Tutsi fighters in eastern Zaire. There was also disturbing evidence that the RPF had used deception to infiltrate the UNHCR and other humanitarian organizations, along with sightings of AFDL soldiers traveling in trucks bearing false UNHCR logos. A number of refugees in the jungle told me that the UNHCR had been infiltrated by Rwandan spies. A priest gave me a handwritten account from a witness who claimed the UNHCR had provided Mark Kazindu, a Tutsi who had received military training and was working for the AFDL, with transportation, handsets, and money to locate refugees in the areas of Bukavu, Walikale, and Shabunda. Kazindu allegedly passed that information on to the AFDL, whose fighters would enter these zones and massacre Hutus. Other humanitarian agencies complained that they were forced to use AFDL facilitators in order to operate in certain zones, and that these facilitators would later inform their military commanders of concentrations of refugees to expedite their killings. There is no evidence to suggest that senior officials from the UNHCR and other aid agencies knew about this infiltration when it began, but they did know that their aid workers were operating in a climate of fear. The rape of the American woman working for UNICEF in Goma, which occurred a week before I arrived, had sent shock.